She stood silent beneath the jeweled veil, her face pale and fixed, as King Ferdinand VII took her hand before the court. They called it a royal wedding, he called it a miracle. She was not Isabel, his long-dead queen, but Ferdinand insisted. She had returned, reborn, chosen by fate. The court clapped politely. The church approved. But beneath the gold and lace, the girl they married was a stranger, nameless, voiceless, and already vanishing. Ferdinand didn't want a bride. He wanted a memory, and she chosen for her eerie resemblance to a woman buried long ago became that memory's prisoner. Each day he dressed her in echoes of the past. He called her by Isabel's name. He told her who she was, what she loved, what she feared. Her own life was erased with terrifying precision. This wasn't a love story. It was obsession disguised as devotion. A king unable to let go. A woman forced to disappear to keep breathing. As Ferdinand's grip on reality crumbled, so did the line between past and present, till even she could no longer tell who she was. This is the true horror behind the crown. Not violence, but erasure. Not death, but being remembered only as someone else. She stood in silence, the silk of her wedding gown clinging to her skin, heavy, not with fabric, but with fear. The chapel buzzed with whispers, not blessings. She wasn't smiling. Her lips didn't move. Her name had already been stripped from the ceremony. He called her by another Isabel. The king's breath rattled like dry leaves. Ferdinand VII, monarch of Spain, stood before her like a monument to decay. His fingers trembled as he reached for her hand, not with affection, but possession. She flinched. The room noticed. No one dared react. She was not the first bride offered to this king, but she was the first who looked like her. No one knew who her truly was. Some whispered she had been his sister. Others claimed she was a childhood friend, a cousin, maybe a ghost of memory warped by time and madness. But what they all knew was this: she had died young, and the king had never been the same. Ferdinand was once called El Decido, the desired one, a prince with promise. But power had twisted him into something unrecognizable. His return to the throne after Napoleon's invasion was hailed as a victory for tradition, yet it only marked the beginning of repression. He abolished the liberal constitution, crushed dissent, and turned Spain into a place of silence and shadows. Now, at 50, bloated, broken, and tyrannical, he stood beside a girl, not yet 20. Her resemblance was uncanny. That was why she was chosen. She hadn't wanted this. Her father had made the arrangement. Her family's lands had been seized during the war. Their restoration came at a cost. That cost stood in front of her now, panting through cracked lips, grinning without joy. Her mother wept quietly in the pews, not for pride, but because she knew she'd never see her daughter again. The wedding proceeded with disturbing efficiency. The priests rushed the rites. The music played off-key. No one cheered. The bride never spoke. Her silence became her only armor. He never used her real name. To him, she was Isabel now. The dead girl had returned, or perhaps she had never left. When the ceremony ended, the king kissed her hand, not her lips. Not yet. He stared into her eyes with a hunger she couldn't understand. Not lust, not love. Something older, something colder, like he was searching through her face for someone else's soul. The wedding night was not what people feared. It was worse in its restraint. He spoke to her softly, as if she might vanish. He showed her toys from his youth, dolls, broken ribbons, letters never sent. He called her little dove and sister. She sat still, perfectly still, afraid any movement might break whatever illusion protected her. Days became rituals. Her name was gone. Servants referred to her by the wrong one. She was dressed in styles 2 decades out of date, given books long out of print, forced to relearn dances and songs she'd never heard before, because Isabel had known them. She tried to protest once. She called herself by her real name, Ferdinand's expression shattered. His lips curled, his eyes filled with rage. Then, just as suddenly, he collapsed into tears, begging her not to leave again. "Don't die again," he whispered. She never used her name again. Historians call Ferdinand a reactionary, a monarch desperate to hold back time. But inside the palace, time didn't just slow, it stopped. Her world was frozen in someone else's past. She wasn't a queen. She was a replica, a body with borrowed memories. He held her hand at dinners, stared at her across rooms, but never truly saw her. Only what he wanted to see, only what he had lost. Some courtiers admired her beauty, thinking she'd gained favor. Others pitied her. A few feared her, whispering she must be cursed. The old women said her eyes had the look of someone half buried. She learned to smile without meaning it, learned to sit still through his long stories of youth and loss, nodding at the appropriate places, as if she'd been there. One night, she found a journal in a locked drawer. It belonged to Isabel, the original one, a girl of fire, wit, and rebellion. She had spoken Latin, mocked the church, ridden horses alone. Ferdinand had adored her. But the entries ended abruptly. There was no explanation, only a page torn clean from the binding. She burned the journal. She began to forget her own handwriting. When letters arrived from her family, they were opened first by guards. Some were never delivered. Her replies were rewritten by palace scribes. She suspected they were never sent. The only constant was Ferdinand. He never traveled, never left her alone for long. He seemed to fear losing her again. Every time she asked for solitude, he brought her another gift: old combs, faded shawls, childhood books, paintings of a girl that looked almost but not quite like her. Eventually, she stopped asking. Once, she overheard a maid whispering to another, "She's his mirror." But when the mirror breaks, what will he do? They both fell silent when they saw her. The next day, those maids were replaced. She began to have dreams not of freedom, but of water. Deep water, cold water. Dreams of drowning while someone on the shore called her by the wrong name. Ferdinand began referring to their shared past. "Do you remember the lemon trees? You used to sing on that balcony? Mother said we were inseparable." She didn't remember, because it wasn't her memory. But she nodded anyway. The rituals grew stricter. Daily dressings in Isabel's favorite colors, meals prepared in old family styles, a lullaby hummed at night. She was no longer sure if she was pretending or forgetting. One afternoon, she saw a portrait unveiled in the great hall. Two girls side by side, one clearly her, the other the original Isabel. They were dressed identically. The painter had blurred their features, just enough to confuse. There was no plaque, no names, just two faces, frozen in time. She stared at it for hours. She no longer recognized which one she was. Ferdinand VII had been born under the weight of prophecy and failure. From his earliest days, he was told he would save Spain, redeem the monarchy, crush the tide of revolution. But as he aged, surrounded by betrayal and war, his purpose turned inward. The king became less interested in ruling a country than in controlling the past. Those who served him saw it. Ministers were dismissed over dreams. Priests were chosen not for faith, but for loyalty to his private rituals. And at the center of it all was the girl no one dared name. He believed she had returned. In court, he referred to her in the past tense and present interchangeably. Isabel loved music, he'd say. Isabel loves it still. He spoke of her childhood as though it belonged to both of them. She was not a person. She was a symbol, a proof that time could be undone. That grief, if shaped carefully, could be reversed. And the girl, who once had a name of her own, understood that. Saying no would not free her. It would only erase her faster. Ferdinand's enemies called him a tyrant, his supporters a defender of tradition. But inside the palace, Ideology didn't matter. Only memory did, and the girl became its hostage. She was required to reenact moments that were never hers. They celebrated her birthday on Isabel's date. She received letters dictated by the king and signed in her handwriting. A servant once placed a doll at her bedside and whispered, "She used to sleep with this." The girl touched it, unsure if it was meant to comfort or command her. The court watched in silence. Ministers bowed. Ambassadors offered gifts. Artists painted portraits. No one mentioned the growing contradiction, that a king who ruled with iron and fire was crumbling privately into fantasy. Some tried to intervene. A young priest voiced concern after a sermon, asking if the queen required help. He was dismissed. The next morning, sent to a remote monastery. Another servant who addressed her by her real name was never seen again. There were rumors Ferdinand had lost a child in secret. Others believed the original Isabel had died by his own hand, whether by accident or obsession. The truth was buried beneath decades of paranoia. What mattered was what Ferdinand believed, and he believed the girl beside him had returned from the dead, and that she must never leave again. She began to lose her appetite. Food felt foreign. Her own voice sounded staged. He forced her to sing in private concerts, songs she had never heard before. "You know the words," he'd whisper. "Don't pretend you've forgotten." When she hesitated, he wept. When she complied, he smiled like a man seeing a ghost smile back. The performance became survival. She memorized the cues, the music, the posture. Each day a role, each hour a test. One night, he brought her to a hidden chamber beneath the palace. The room was circular, lit by candles, its walls covered in portraits, every one of Isabel. Some were aged, some idealized, some obviously unfinished. He told her he had commissioned them over the years, from memory, from dreams. But none of them got it right, he said, until you came back. He made her stand in the center and compare herself. "You see, the nose, the eyes, the sadness. You are her." She nodded, because not nodding had consequences. Her world grew smaller. Guards posted outside her doors changed daily. Her ladies-in-waiting were replaced by silent watchers. She once tried to request a visit from her family. The request was denied. "They'll confuse you," the king said. "They'll break the spell." He believed her presence sustained him, that if she left, he would die. So she stayed. Or rather, she remained where he had placed her, within the frame of a life that never belonged to her. Others in the palace began to fear her. Whispers returned. Some said she had bewitched the king. Others believed she was not real at all, just an illusion the court tolerated to keep the king from unraveling completely. Some even thought she was a punishment sent from God to torment a monarch who had betrayed the people. None of them spoke to her directly. She moved through halls like mist, heard but not addressed, seen but not understood. She began to lose the ability to sleep. At night, she stared at the ceiling, counting the breaths between the king's words. He often visited her at strange hours, telling stories from a childhood she'd never lived. "Remember the orchard?" he'd ask. "You cried when we left." She would nod again. Always nod. The imbalance of power was total. She had no voice in decisions, no allies in court, no name on any document. Her signature was practiced for ceremonial letters written in advance by the king's scribes. At one banquet, a diplomat attempted to toast her. He raised his glass and said her real name. The king interrupted with a smile. "You mean Isabel?" The room laughed. The diplomat did not return to court. She began writing in secret. Not letters, no one would read them, but pages of thoughts, memories, fragments of the life she was losing. She hid them behind loose stones in her chamber. It was the only proof she still existed beyond the role she played. But even the words on paper began to feel like fiction. The king grew possessive. He spoke of her future as if it were already past. When we were young, he'd say, referring to memories that were never hers. He believed she had forgiven him for something unsaid. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said one day. I just didn't want you to leave, she realized. He didn't love her. He didn't even love Isabel. He loved the absence, the wound, the idea that someone might return and let him pretend nothing had changed. She was not a person to him. She was a repair. The dread grew daily. He began speaking of making their image eternal. Statues, paintings, a mausoleum for two. If you die again, he said, I'll go with you this time. She smiled, as she had been taught to, but inside, a single word began repeating itself like a warning. Escape, escape, escape. She didn't know how. She only knew the moment was coming, and when it did, she'd have to choose. Stay and be erased completely, or run and risk disappearing. Anyway, either way, the mirror was cracking, and behind it, nothing was whole. The change began with a single refusal. It was small. She declined to wear a necklace Ferdinand had chosen. He stared at her, lips parted, as if she had uttered something in a foreign language. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he laughed, softly, kissed her forehead, and left the room. The next day, he returned with the same necklace, and said nothing. He placed it on her neck himself, hands trembling. From then on, every accessory, every color, every scent she wore was dictated, again without exception. That tiny moment of resistance was not forgotten. Over the following weeks, he grew more watchful, less trusting. Her windows were nailed shut. One of her servants disappeared. Another suddenly stopped speaking to her altogether. The silence closed in like fog. She realized then that the king didn't only want to remember the past, he wanted to preserve it, like an insect trapped in amber. And she was the thing inside, frozen but still visible, never allowed to change. Her hair was cut to match old sketches, her shoes dyed to match, fragments from old trunks. Each day became a reenactment. And not just for Ferdinand. Even those around him played along, now not out of belief, but fear. The court had become a theater, the king, the playwright, and she was the central character in a play she couldn't revise, only repeat. She tried once more to speak her real name aloud. She whispered it to herself when alone, just to hear the sound, but it no longer felt like hers. It landed awkwardly on her tongue, like a word from a lost language. That was when the fear shifted into something deeper: shame. Not shame for what she had done, but for what she had become. A shell, a shadow of someone she never knew. One afternoon, a visiting noblewoman asked her a question. What were her thoughts on a recent book? She didn't know the answer. Not because she hadn't read it, but because she didn't remember what her own opinion sounded like. Her voice, when it came, felt borrowed. She repeated something Ferdinand had once said. The woman looked puzzled, then smiled politely. She had become fluent in impersonation. What broke her was not pain or cruelty, but the quiet, the absence of true connection. There were no real conversations, no true touches. Even the king's affection was mechanical, like a priest reciting ritual. He would cup her face and call her my treasure, my little dove, and sometimes just ghost. She did not know which name hurt more. The king's moods grew more erratic. He spoke of visions, claimed Isabel visited him in dreams, and warned him of betrayal. He began to accuse his ministers of plotting against her. Some were exiled, others imprisoned. He dismissed an entire guard rotation because one of them had looked at her with doubt. She felt his unraveling, accelerating, and with it, her own. One night, he showed her a room filled with clothes, all replicas of Isabel's childhood wardrobe, dresses, gloves, stockings, all in miniature. She was instructed to choose one. She did, numb and silent. He asked her to sit beside him and tell a story from when they were young. She tried. Her voice shook. He watched her like a parent watches a child stumble through a lie. Then he smiled. You almost remember. She did not cry that night. She had stopped crying weeks ago. Instead, she stared at herself in the mirror, trying to find the seam between her face and the one she was forced to wear. But they were merging. The difference was no longer visible, even to her. She began to dissociate. She floated through conversations, lost time. Hours vanished without memory. Once, she found herself in the library, with an open book on her lap, pages soaked with tears she didn't remember shedding. The words on the page meant nothing. Her thoughts weren't forming in language anymore, only sensations. Cold, weight, dread. Ferdinand began keeping her closer. He had her meals brought to his chamber. He spoke to her of eternity, of statues, carved in their image, of mausoleums that would keep them side by side forever. Even death won't take you this time, he whispered. I'll follow. She tried to respond, but no longer knew what to say. He didn't notice her silence. He filled the space with monologues, sometimes praising her, sometimes scolding her for past sins that belonged to someone else. His grip on time had fully broken. So had hers. Then came the portraits. New ones, commissioned with obsessive detail. In every image, she was younger, more fragile, more idealized. One painting portrayed her as a child, holding the king's hand. She had never been that child, but now the entire court believed she had. The line between memory and invention was erased. Her mind began to split. She would repeat sentences without knowing it. She wrote letters that she then tore up in confusion. Her dreams were filled with white rooms and locked doors. In one nightmare, she stood in front of a mirror and saw Isabel's face instead of her own. She tried to scream, but the sound came out in the king's voice. The final fracture came quietly. She was walking through the garde, brief permission granted by the king when she saw a girl from her past, a cousin who had come to court as a lady in waiting. The girl called her by her real name, softly, like a secret being returned. She turned to look, mouth open, but no words came. Her cousin's face fell. Then she bowed and left. The moment passed. Nothing changed, but something inside her cracked beyond repair. From then on, she avoided mirrors, stopped writing. Even her thoughts lost shape. The only voice she still recognized was the king's, and even that had become a loop of old phrases. You're back now. You won't leave. We were meant for each other. There was no resistance left in her, only breath, only ritual. The palace became a tomb. The days were the same. Her name was never spoken, her history never acknowledged, and the man beside her, once a ruler of a kingdom, was now the warden of a dream that had consumed them both. She no longer hoped for escape. She no longer feared him. She feared what would be left of her if he ever let go, because what he wanted had finally come true. She was no longer anyone else. She was Isabel, and no one remembered otherwise, not even herself. The king's health began to fail, but no one dared speak of it. His hands shook during meals. His voice, once thunderous, grew hoarse and halting. He took longer to rise from his chair, but still insisted on daily rituals. She sat beside him, still performing, still pretending. But now, something subtle had shifted. The fear that had once dominated her life had become a kind of numbness. There was no more future to imagine, only the suffocating stillness of endless performance. He spoke often of legacy, of monuments and tapestries, of preserving their great love. But it was never love. It was possession dressed in memory, a desperate man clinging to the illusion of control, shaping the world to reflect the one he lost. She had become both shrine and relic, never living, only displayed. Sometimes he asked her if she remembered the orchard again. Sometimes he called her the wrong name, entire Lisabellita, Bellezza, even Maria once. He didn't notice the difference. His mind was splintering. and the fragments were all sharp. One night, he took her hand and said, "If I die, you'll follow, won't you?" She gave the only answer that kept her alive. Yes, but something inside her cracked at the lie. Not because she wanted to live, but because she no longer knew what that meant. Living had become surviving inside a role she could no longer exit. Even death, she feared, might not free her. She imagined being buried under the name Isabel, remembered in paintings and songs that had nothing to do with her, erased even in memory. He began to speak of a mausoleum again, to coffins side by side, gold and marble, one for the king who could not forget, the other for the girl who had no past. He had already commissioned it, he said. Her likeness had been sculpted from portraits. The artist never asked to meet her. He didn't need to. He had references, imagined her from brushstrokes, not flesh, each day blurred into the next. She stopped counting time. Her old name felt distant. When she tried to write it again, her hand froze. She forgot its shape. Her own handwriting startled her. It was the only thing that still felt honest, but even that was fading. One morning, she woke with a strange thought. If she were to vanish, who would notice? Not mourn, not react, but truly notice that something specific, someone real, had disappeared. One of the king's closest advisors died unexpectedly. At the funeral, Ferdinand wept uncontrollably. Not for the man, she realized, but for the stability he represented. The illusion of order. He clung to her tightly afterward, repeating, "You'll stay, won't you? No more leaving." She nodded, always nodded. But in that moment, she decided she would leave, not through rebellion, not in defiance, but through erasure. She began unraveling herself deliberately. She stopped reacting when spoken to, stopped responding to cues. When the king asked about a memory, she remained still. When he wept, she did not comfort him. When he demanded a smile, she gave none. At first, he shouted, then pleaded, then begged. Eventually, he began speaking to empty air beside her. She had become the symbol he always wanted, compliant, unresisting, hollow. But now it was not performance. It was truth. She had vanished from within. Her identity stripped, layer by layer, until only the role remained. A role even she no longer believed in. On the king's final birthday, she was dressed in white and adorned with jewels. He didn't speak to her directly. He gave a toast to the eternal Isabel, and the court echoed his words. No one met her eyes. No one acknowledged the girl beneath the title. She sat, still, smiling faintly, her hands folded in her lap like porcelain. The performance was perfect, the illusion total. The king died 3 months later. The official story was that he passed peacefully in sleep. Some said he whispered her name as he faded. Others claimed he asked for forgiveness. None of it mattered. With his death, everything froze. The court moved quickly. Ministers rushed to consolidate power. Officials came to her chamber with documents. She was asked to sign, not with her own name, with Isabel's. She refused. It was quiet, firm, final. The first true refusal since the necklace. The shock on their faces was brief. Orders came swiftly. She was removed from the palace. No public notice was given, no announcement made. She was not imprisoned, simply discarded, as though the role had ended and the actress could be forgotten. She was sent to a remote villa under the pretense of rest. No visitors were permitted, no correspondence allowed. The staff referred to her as the widow. She never corrected them. She rarely spoke. In her room, there were no mirrors, only paintings of someone else's life. She burned them, one by one, in secret, not out of anger, but out of quiet necessity. To remember what wasn't hers, she had to destroy it. Years passed. She aged quietly, out of sight. Sometimes, rumors reached the capital that Isabel had survived and lived in hiding. Some believed she'd been resurrected. Others thought she was immortal. The truth was less dramatic. She was alone. Not free, not quite sane, but no longer anyone else. And that was enough. She died unrecognized, her grave unmarked, not because no one cared, but because no one knew who she had been. Her story remained, in fragments, whispers, in royal archives, inconsistencies in portraits, footnotes in memoirs. Even those who had known her referred only to Isabel, as though the real girl had never existed, as if the legend had eaten the truth completely. And yet, somewhere in the villa's remains, a journal survived. Pages torn, ink faded, but legible. Not memoir, not confession. Just one sentence, repeated again and again, in a hand that grew steadier. Over time, I was not her. It was not rebellion, not vengeance. It was memory reclaimed. A name quietly spoken into the dark after a lifetime of silence. A truth so small, it almost went unnoticed, but not quite. Someone read it. Someone remembered. And that, in the end, was enough to make the ghost real again.